New normal sa araw-araw na pamumuhay. Gamitin sensya at teknolohiya sa ating problema ngayong pandemya. New normal! New normal ang programang hitik sa ideya. Kapupulutan ng madaming aral na tutulong para sa ating kinabukasan. New normal!
Welcome to New Normal 101, kung saan sa tulong ng siyensya at teknolohiya, lalabanan natin ang pandemya. Good afternoon mga kaisko at mga kaiska. Isa na namang biyernes kasama kayo. Isa na namang biyernes na bubusog sa inyong mga kaalaman. I am Jeremiah Nataba and this is New Normal 101. So last episode together with Joshua Pineda, binigyan tayo ni Dr. Christopher Sasot ng tips upang maiwasan ang Zoom fatigue. So just a quick recap, ano nga ba yung Zoom fatigue? So basically, it's a phenomenon na na-experience natin whenever we are exposed in a lengthy session sa online class or for example, sa online meetings when you're working already. So it usually leads to, of course, to extreme exhaustion and minsan burning out. So but, you know guys, if you missed out on our previous episode of New Normal 101, don't worry because we have it uploaded on PUP Create TV's Facebook page. Don't forget to hit like and follow PUP Create TV for any updates on New Normal 101 topics. So with me this afternoon is none other than, perhaps, syempre, ngayon ko na siya nakita because for today's episode, we have a fresh new face on New Normal 101 na makasama natin for this afternoon. He's an onboarding coordinator of Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines or YACAP. Ladies and gentlemen, mga kaisko at mga kaiska, let us all welcome Chito Arceo Jr. Welcome Chito sa aming programa na New Normal 101. How are you? Musta ka?
Hello everyone, and of course to my co-host Jeremiah. Hello! I hope you are all doing well. Thank you for having me here sa New Normal 101. I'm sure this week's episode will be no different from any of the episodes that we have done so far. Dahil dito sa New Normal 101, we will definitely learn new and relevant topics na kaabang-abang talaga, lalo na para sa ating mga kaisko at mga kaiska.
Welcome again, Chito, and it is our pleasure to have you on board. And you're right, I couldn't agree more. Because in this episode, just as promised, we will be tackling more on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Today, our main focus kasi, Chito, is on the 13th goal, which is climate action.
Yes.
But of course, before that, for the context of our kaisko and our kaiska, let us first talk about what climate change is all about. So basically, upon my research and upon reading a few articles here and there, well, 5 minutes na naman ako nagbasa. Pero climate change refers to a significant and a long-term change or shift in the global climate. Climate change is a change. Climate change is a change, syempre. Climate change is ang pagbabago ng usual weather found in a certain place or in a certain location. This could be a change in how much rain a place usually gets in a year or kung gaano kainit sa isang taon. Or it could be a change in that particular place's usual temperature, as I said, for a month or much worse, for an entire season. Now you, Chito, I know you are currently enrolled in SHS. I know you're a youth advocate for this particular movement, to mitigate the effects of climate change. May I just ask, what do you think causes this phenomenon, this whole climate change? Ano kaya ang naging reason kung bakit meron tayong ganito ngayon?
Naku, Jeremiah, there are a lot of factors
Yes.
that actually contribute to climate change. It's not something that happens overnight, no? Kasi climate change is something that is very, very, very long term. So, we have natural causes tulad na lamang ng volcanic eruptions, pati na rin ng distance natin from the sun bilang ang planet natin Earth that can change over time, and this all affects the Earth's climate. So we have two factors that are actually relevant on the timescales of contemporary climate change. And these are, first, which is yung volcanic activity, and second is yung changes in solar radiation. So in terms of the Earth's energy balance, so yung mga factors na to, nakaka-influence sila sa amount ng incoming energy natin kung gaano tayo kalayo and gaano tayo kalapit. And of course, ang alam ng lahat, which is volcanic eruptions. These are actually episodic. Hindi naman everyday may nangyayaring volcanic eruptions. Lord, we hope not. And of course, these have relatively short-term effects on the climate. So, for example, nung tumutok yung Mount Pinatubo noong 1991, nagkaroon to actually ng global cooling effect na hindi ganun ka-prominent, pero it still happened na bumaba ng 14 degrees ang ating temperature. So the changes in solar irradiance then, na nasabi ni kanina, have contributed to climate trends over the past century. Actually, nagsimula to nung Industrial Revolution, nung nasimulang ma-utilize ang mga fossil fuels. So dahil dito, nagkaroon ng effects, which is nagkaroon ng additional greenhouse gases sa atmosphere na that was reported have been over 50 times that of the changes in the sun's output. Kaya napakalala talaga.
It's very interesting because most of your explanation is science-based, pero what siguro I and a lot of other Filipino youth and a lot of Filipino people know of is that climate change is usually brought about by us humans, especially yung mga greenhouse emissions na pinoproduce natin, di ba? So that's usually yung common knowledge, yung surface knowledge about what climate change is. So very, very thankful that you shared with us yung siguro more on the natural phenomenon side kung bakit nagkakaroon tayo ng climate change na tinatawag. So ayun nga, as I mentioned, greenhouse emissions. Climate change kasi guys can also be caused by, well, majority of which kasi is caused by, let's admit it, human activities such as the burning of fossil fuels and the conversion of land for forestry and agriculture. Subdivision. Sorry. Pero ayun. Guys, these things or these activities that we do in turn, it can influence both the amount of incoming energy, okay, and the amount of outgoing energy, and can have both warming and cooling effects on our climate.
Ayan, siguro Jeremiah, to clarify lang talaga, no? We as humans, hindi tayo yung ang pinaka-cause ng climate change, because climate change has always been there since the start of the earth. Tayo lang talaga ang main reason bakit na-advance into extreme levels ang rate ng climate change. And of course, the most dominant product of the said greenhouse emissions is none other than carbon dioxide. So, the dominant product of the fossil fuel combustion is carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas. So the overall effect of human activities since the Industrial Revolution a few centuries ago, dahil sa effects or rather dahil sa emissions ng carbon dioxide, na-enhance lalo yung greenhouse effect brought about by emissions of other greenhouse gases. So carbon dioxide is not necessarily bad per se, but the excessive carbon dioxide, it's parang yun ang papatay sa atin in the long term. Dahil it increases the greenhouse effect sa ating atmosphere. So more thermal energy is trapped in the atmosphere, causing the planet to become warmer than it would be naturally. This is called global warming, na alam natin ngayon sa ating mga textbooks.
Exactly. And a part of which is siguro a big contributor to this, just correct me if I'm wrong, Chito, pero a big contributor of this particular global warming would be the excessive use of hydrocarbons, if I'm not mistaken. Tama ba ako?
That's true, actually, yes.
And what's in a way, siguro for big corporations, what's alarming would be we're going to run out of hydrocarbons. It's rather obvious, that's a fact. It's getting more difficult kasi and more expensive to extract hydrocarbons in the first place. So really, we're just arguing about the when side of things, when hydrocarbons run out of when will
that's true.
Exactly, or become potentially more expensive to extract hydrocarbons, not if. It's never an if when it comes to that. So just a quick anecdote lang naman about hydrocarbons and just to fact check lang yung nalalaman ko. So now that we are clear sa what climate change is all about, and of course yung severity of the effects of climate change, let us now discuss the 13th goal of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which is climate action. So basically, ano nga ba where does this particular goal revolve around with? So its mission is to step up our efforts, humanity's efforts, to take urgent action to combat the effects and the impacts of climate change. So now guys, the 13th goal includes strengthening yung resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards and natural disasters in all countries. It also aims to improve the education, yung awareness raising ng kung ano ba yung epekto, masamang epekto ng climate change and global warming, and of course, yun nga, the institutional capacity on climate change mitigation, adaptation, well, when it reaches an alarming level, of course, as you said, Chito, climate change has always been here since the dawn of time. It's just us humans who are accelerating its effects. So it's more of how we will adapt to this particular setup. So hopefully it doesn't go as bad as I thought it would. Pero and sorry, one of the goals of that particular goal as well, the United Nations, is of course to raise awareness on the impact and kung paano ma-reduce yung impact ng global warming and climate change. So there.
That's very true. And of course, Jeremiah, I think yung mga kaisko natin, yung mga kaiska, they might be wondering, ano ba yung effect ng 13th goal sa atin? Why should we be concerned about the 13th goal? So, it is important to remember that every country in the world is already experiencing the devastating effects of climate change. And the Philippines more so than the others. Kasi climate change directly impacts the Philippines in many ways na talagang targeted siya sa ating, aside sa economy, sa ating geographical location na rin. So, this directly impacts our agricultural yields. Naku, Jeremiah, we are a very agricultural country. No? Napakalaki ng dependence natin when it comes to our agricultural sector. So, malaki talaga ang impact ng climate change when it comes to that. So, we have examples here as harvest of maize, wheat, and other staple crops actually fell by 14 megatons between 1981 and 2002. Because of the warmer climate. Can you imagine, di ba? Napakalaking impact nun sa atin. And of course, speaking of geographical location, the Philippines is highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, including sea level rise, dahil we are an archipelago. We are located in the Pacific Ocean, of all oceans pa naman. And we also have the increased frequency of extreme weather events. Naku, napakainit ngayon, tapos bukas napakalamig. Oo nga. Every year, Jeremiah, if napapansin mo, mas lumalala ang summer, mas lumalamig ang rainy season natin. And that's not random. That's actually because of climate change. And climate change is here saying na, pansinin niyo ako kasi nadarama niyo na ako. Ayan. Of course, we also have the rising temperatures and extreme rainfalls. And this is due to the Philippines having high exposure to natural hazards, being located in the Pacific Ring of Fire. And of course, other factors include our dependence on climate-sensitive natural resources, and of course, the vast coastlines kung saan nakalocate ang most of the population. And it's important to remember na hindi lang tayo ang affected dyan. Being one of the most biodiverse countries in the entire world, napaka-affected rin ng ating plants and animals. As the earth continues to warm, initial habitats may no longer be hospitable for certain animals or plants. One example is actually yung corals natin. Because of coral bleaching, unti-unti na silang nawawala, and that's caused by the warming of the earth. That is part of climate change.
So I definitely agree. Climate change is, needless to say, it is truly evident here in the Philippines.
It is.
Kasi kahapon lang, ulan ng ulan sa amin. Kasi I live in San Pedro, Laguna, and grabe, sobrang lakas na ulan dito kahapon. And then now, I'm melting sa sobrang init ngayon, sa totoo lang. and this pollution is not helping, to be honest with you. Pero the rising warm temperature is just, I think it's just one of the many effects of climate change. You see, I think humans change, and so does the world. That goes without saying. The world changes, and so does and must humanity. But I think it's a basic principle of the universe where for every action there is an equal and opposing reaction. I'm not gonna sit here and talk about the benefits of, kasi innovation comes with a price, di ba? But I'm not gonna sit here and talk about the benefits of innovation. But I hope our kaisko and our kaiskas are getting the bigger picture that we have to adapt in a way still given the circumstances and the hand that we're dealt with, realizing of course the benefits will come along the way, but still there should be a way, there are ways on how we can innovate, and there are ways on how we can adapt na of course hindi naman nasisira yung ating kalikasan or hindi naman naapektuhan ng napakalala yung ating klima or temperatura sa panahon ngayon. Ewan ko lang kasi sa inyo mga kaiska, pero grabe talaga. Ako kasi hindi ko na kinakaya yung init na to. Napakainit talaga, and I think this is a sign that climate change is here. It is very rampant already, and it's not only the fact that it's here, but it's getting worse. That's why I think we have to act now. Because if not now, then of course, kailan pa? Saving lives and livelihoods requires urgent action to address both the pandemic, ito pa, yung climate emergency na meron ng mundo natin. Humans, I think, should plead guilty in a way and take the initiative and pledge to do something about climate change, gaano man kaliit yan. Well, to put itself in its context, hindi siya maliit na bagay, actually.
That's
Tama
very,
ba, Chito?
very true. Hindi siya maliit na bagay.
Oo.
And speaking of mga maliit na bagay, small actions can have a big impact naman on the other hand. So, sabi nga ni Ms. Earth 2017, Karen Ebasco, our micro actions have macro effects. So, even simple gestures like recycling can help aid climate change. But it is also important to not only put the blame on ourselves, but also to hold those accountable talaga when it comes to the carbon emissions, when it comes to the industrial effects that have been here for a very long time before pa tayo nabuhay. So we need to talk about climate justice and of course accountability. So imagine if we do all of these things, it can make a huge difference when it comes to the effects of climate change.
Correct. I definitely agree. I think what also needs to happen, Chito, is that if we can, I think it is time for us to accelerate our transition towards renewables. That is probably the most sensible thing to do for humanity. Take for example, I think in Saudi Arabia, Saudi has enormous amount of sunlight, needless to say, and that will be there for a very long time. Well, I think at least 1 billion years until the sun explodes. Pero that will be a long time. But yeah, I think investing in solar resources is something that will preserve the future. Not so much the oil and gas as it is a temporary thing. You know, as I said earlier, it's going to be gone in a few years, probably 100 years or something. In the future, I think we'll be looking back. I'm not saying a very distant future, probably, as I said, at the end of the century. So we'll look back at oil and gas the same way as how we look back on coal today. Like it was the trend back then in the Industrial Revolution, but today it's almost, siguro safe to say, prehistoric. You know, prehistoric, but yeah, it's sort of an exaggeration due to the innovations and development that we currently have. So yeah, I mean, now that we have currently, now that we have shared our knowledge about UNSDG goal number 13 and sort of a refresher goal on climate change, guys, mga kaiska, huwag na natin palampasin pa at patagalin dahil excited na kami para sa next segment na kung saan ating mabibigyang buhay ang climate education with a very, very special guest. If you want to find out who she is, then please stay tuned sa New Normal 101. Dahil dito, modern tayo.
Muli na namang namahagi ang universidad ng locally produced ethyl alcohol. Nasa 3,000 bote ng ethyl alcohol na may virgin coconut oil ang napamahagi ng sintang paaralan nitong 11 ng Hunyo sa 24 na adopted barangay nito.
At sa lahat po ng bumubuo ng Extended Management Office, kami po ay lubos na nagpapasalamat dahil kami po ay isa sa barangay na nabigyan ninyo po ng inyong locally made ethyl alcohol. Naway pagpatuloy niyo pa po ang paggawa ng mga ganitong uri ng produkto upang patuloy po na makatulong sa aming komunidad, lalong-lalo na po sa panahon ngayon na nasa pandemic po tayo.
Matatandaang noon lamang buwan ng Abril ay matagumpay ring na pamahagi ng gawang ethyl alcohol with virgin coconut oil ang sintang paaralan sa ilang ospital at police station sa Maynila. Ang proyektong ito ng sintang paaralan ay suportado ng Commission on Higher Education o CHED na naglalayong maipalaganap ang kaligtasan ng ating kababayan kontra sa nakahawang sakit ng COVID-19. Ako si Limuel Baruela para sa The Observer Flash Online.
Welcome to New Normal 101, kung saan sa tulong ng siyensya at teknolohiya, lalabanan natin ang pandemya. Welcome back to New Normal 101. Mga kaisko at mga kaiska, in our previous segment, we talked about climate change and its effects sa mundo natin. And for this segment naman, we will talk about the importance of climate education and why it should be promoted in schools. Now that one of the major problems in the world, other than the pandemic, of course, is, needless to say, syempre, sobrang init ngayon, climate change. I'm sure most of our viewers right now, like me, have very limited knowledge on what climate change is all about, and of course, yung climate education na tinatawag. That is why, ladies and gentlemen, mga kaisko, mga kaiska, we have invited a very special guest to help us out with that. She's a full-time climate justice activist, and she is also a convener or international spokesperson of Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines, also known as YACAP. So, without further ado, let us all give a thunderous virtual applause to Miss Mitzi Jonelle Tan. Miss Mitzi, welcome po to New Normal 101. Kumusta po kayo?
Hello po, okay naman. Kamusta kayo?
Oh, we're doing very fine. How about you, Chito?
Ayan, Miss Mitzi, we're doing amazing. And I actually have the privilege of calling Miss Mitzi my friend. It's actually such an honor. Kaya, Miss Mitzi, here in the New Normal 101, we always ask our guests one simple question. So what is your new normal during this pandemic situation?
Hirap sagutin kasi wala akong routine dahil nga sobrang iba na ng situation. I guess yung pinaka-routine ko na is when I wake up, yung first thing na ginagawa ko talaga is turning all the lights sa room ko. Kasi maraming lights yung room ko dahil marami akong plants. So, may sarili-sarili silang lights. And then, first thing na ginagawa ko is inaayos ko yung bed ko, tapos nilinis ko yung room ko. So, kahit late ako, kahit anong mangyari, first thing na gagawin ko talaga is linisin yung room ko kasi ayokong nag-start yung day na magulo yung room.
Really?
Ang nangyayari most of the time is nalilate ako kasi nalilate ako magising, tapos mag-aayos ako, tapos tsaka pala ako papasok sa meeting or aalis for physical meetings.
I see. Actually, nakaka-relate ako dun sa kailangan ayusin ko muna yung kwarto ko before I start the day. I remember kanina, I was actually, Chito knows about this. I was running late kanina for this session and I told Emma, I'd be late for mga 10:15 and it was already what, 10:14 at that time. And I know that I should have been moving my butt off para mag-set up, but no, I must fix my beddings muna kasi hindi pwedeng magulo yung kwarto ko before I start my day. So I definitely relate to that routine, ika nga. Okay, so sorry for taking too long on sharing that. Pero yeah, back to our topic, which is climate action. Miss Mitzi, we are very pleased for you to be here. It is truly an honor for you to be on board New Normal 101. So please do the honors and introduce to us yung climate education na tinatawag, because as I said, we have limited knowledge about this and we'd be very glad if we know more about it during our session today. I'm sure we're all excited.
So the importance of climate education, it aims to address the impending threats of the climate crisis or climate change and come up with ways to properly respond it. The problem, we kind of have climate education naman now in our schools. I mean, I'm sure natutunan niyo naman yung global warming, I think ozone layers, melting ice caps, polar bears, siguro mga ganun yung extent ng climate education na natutunan natin in school. But the problem is, a lot of the climate education that we're seeing in the Philippines is if you're privileged enough to have quality education in the first place, because not everyone has education and not all the schools have climate education. Pero the climate education that's present is very foreign and technical and Western and alienating. And it's very hiwalay siya sa nangyayari sa tao. So, narinig mo siya, pero hindi mo naaalala na ito yung nangyayari sa'yo. So, like, growing up, I knew about climate change and we were all experiencing the climate crisis, pero hindi tutugma yung natututunan natin sa nangyayari at naranasan natin. And it's not empowering at all. Para siyang science lesson na tanggapin na lang ito yung nangyayari, imbis na there is something that you can do. And it connects very closely to yung, because it's not empowering, then we're not able to use it in order to advance our citizenship, our human rights, and it's not just the school's education, but also the way media portrays the climate crisis. An example of this is back in, I think it was Typhoon Yolanda. A lot of people didn't evacuate their homes because they didn't know what a storm surge was. So yung term na storm surge, hindi nila alam nung sinasabi siya ng media. So bakit sila aalis? Kasi hindi nila naiintindihan. So that's the importance of climate education and yung proper communication of the climate crisis. Because it is there to keep us safe, it is there to build sustainable future and inspire action, and to really practice yung influencing skills in order to have a systemic approach to the climate crisis.
Yeah, and that's very, very true. Actually, all the points na sinabi ni Ms. Mitzi, talaga namang nakaka-inspire. And not only nakaka-inspire, it actually makes you really wonder about our climate education here, the status of our climate education, and how it should be talaga, and how we should approach it. And I'm sure ang ating mga ka-ISCO and mga ka-ISCA are thinking the same thing. So it's imperative not only to learn about climate change in depth, but also to change one's behavior and actions. And speaking of behavior and actions, Ms. Mitzi, so how can climate education change one's behavior and actions regarding climate change?
I think the most important thing that climate education can do is help you realize that it's not about individual lifestyle change. Kasi marami namang environmentalism material that's available online in our culture. I mean, I'm sure we all grew up with the reduce, reuse, recycle, plant a tree type of environmentalism. Kasi yun yung nasa school, yun yung available. But what climate education can help you realize is that individual lifestyle change isn't accessible to everyone, one. Second is that it's not enough. The most important thing for me, I think, that climate education will show you that carbon dioxide emissions in the air, which are causing the climate crisis, is mostly by multinational companies, by the global north countries, by the 1% richest of the world. So 1% richest of the world contribute more than double carbon dioxide emissions than the poorest 50% of the world. So ganun kalaki yung gap. And so even if we change our lifestyles, even if it was completely changed, hindi pa rin siya enough kasi most of the carbon dioxide emissions are coming from fossil fuel industries and from multinational companies. But it also reminds you that if you are able to do individual lifestyle change, it does help. But again, you always have to remember that it isn't enough. It helps you also understand the urgency of the climate crisis, and learning how to tackle it are essential parts of eco-social competence. Yung thing kasi with the climate crisis is people think it's just the extreme weather events, it's just the long droughts, it's just the more and more increasing and frequent typhoons, which is valid kasi ang intense na tong dalawa na to. But it's also the slower onset events like the sea level rising. And with sea level rising, it's not, yung takot kasi natin is sea level rising tapos babahain na lang tayo. But there's also the part na because of sea level rising, yung mga soil natin magsiseep in yung salt water. And so yung food security natin, yung pagplant natin ng kinakain natin maapektuhan dahil dun sa salt water. And it's all these things, and it's really the understanding that things can and will get worse if business as usual continues. And that's something that we need to remember so that people are empowered to do something, are empowered to change something. And remember that the climate crisis isn't just an environmental issue, it is something that will impact everything. And so dapat weaved into siya, into all the subjects, I would say, so that people really understand that it's an economic, an environmental, a societal, and the systemic issue.
Those are very interesting. Sorry, before I comment on that, Miss Mitzi, earlier in our previous segment, I said na it's so hot in here sa San Pedro Laguna, but now if you can hear my background audio, it's raining. It's literally raining. Ang lakas ng ulan. Sobrang lakas ng ulan. So it could not have been more timed timely than now. So yeah, and anyway, going back, yeah, those are very interesting points, no, Miss Mitzi. I definitely agree that it should be of course climate education should be more integrated and of course in in what we do every day, sorry, and as well as of course what they usually say, get them young. Kumbaga pinagtagpi-tagpi ko na yung mga experience ko before in high school, kasi I remember joining an organization back when I was in high school. It was called YESO. So I think it stands for Youth for Environment in Schools Organization. So yeah, YESO. I remember we used to do fun runs, we used to do yung mga YESO camps, and those were the highlights of my high school years. It's only until now na I just remember it's about climate change, or it's about protecting the environment. And it paints a picture na is YESO, is yung mga projects ba ng YESO, does it really go through the heads of our children, or is it just something na parang ano lang, it's as you said Karina, it's just sort of like let's just accept it as they are. It's what the science textbooks teaches us, so ganun lang siya. It's not really more of a matter that requires a sense of urgency. It's more of parang it's a camp. Everybody loves camps when we were kids, probably until now when we're even now when we're adults. Pero I think mas magandang magkaroon ng mas malaking picture yung kabataan natin, not only yung mga kabataan but of course other Filipino people as well in any age bracket should be given a much bigger picture, should be painted a much better picture on what the effects of climate change is. And yun nga, one of which ay yung initiative ng organization ng YESO. So basically, as far as I know, YESO, if I remember correctly, YESO is a school-based co-curricular organization which will serve as a significant venue for students' actions and movements towards safeguarding, protecting, and conserving yung environment for future generations. As I said, yes, I can vaguely remember that was the point of YESO, pero perhaps, siguro, maybe this is just my personal opinion, maybe it was not that as effective during my days. I just hope it changed now, especially na napakalala na ng ating sitwasyon ngayon for our environment. Now, as far as I can remember, as I said, meron mga cleanup drive for ESO, meron ding mga waste management, mga trainings as well, and of course, yung tinatawag na camp o yung Youth for Environment Summer Camp. And that was a very good experience when I was in high school. So wala lang, it's just very nostalgic, reminiscing it in a way. So now that that's out of the way, Ms. Mitzi, may I just kindly ask, paano kaya nai-integrate yung climate education sa value or sa mission and vision ng YESO? Meron po ba itong, of course, needless to say, meron itong relationship, pero we'd love to hear the siguro in depth on what this relationship is all about between climate education and YESO.
So YESO is a very good initiative, and may mga ibang YESO orgs na part of YACAP actually. But YESO provides you with ways to act, but not necessarily all the YESOs provide you with the information to see that yung mga cleanup drive, yung waste management and segregation, recycling, it's not enough. It doesn't provide you with the empowering knowledge and education that the climate crisis is already here and it's going to get worse. Some do, so syempre depende siya sa kung saan, pero hindi siya institutionalized, and that's the problem. That it depends on the group kung makakahanap sila, kung ma-realize nila yung emergency. And because of that, since hindi siya institutionalized, hindi siya accessible to everyone. And then there's also the part na it is just an organization for a few people. So if hindi ka interested at all, hindi mo siya matutunan. And so that's why kailangan talaga yung climate education para lahat talaga ng tao nakikita. Kasi usually yung mga nasa YESO, interested na sila sa environment, kaya sila sasama. Or at least may konting interest. So more or less, especially now na nag-rise naman na yung climate movement, the youth climate movement across the globe, more or less baka alam na nila na may ganitong climate crisis and they just need more information. So paano na yung mga wala talagang interest, wala talagang information at all, sila yung mas kailangan talagang matuto sa about the climate.
Yeah, that's a very refreshing thought, no, na as opposed to kasi talaga, sorry, do I sound like I'm so old? Pero back in my day, sorry back in my day kasi I remember ESO camps were treated only talaga, and it's saddening looking back at it now. We're only treated as if paano na siya, extracurricular activities as I said. Pero it's very refreshing to hear na hopefully by now that the situation is more pressing and it poses a bigger threat than before and will pose probably a much more major threat in the not so distant future, I hope mas naging yung siguro yung values or yung mission and the vision ng ESO is more alive in the youth right now. About you, Chito, what do you think?
Oh, actually, no. I would just like to share my personal attitude.
Oh, sure.
So, yun, before we wrap everything up, parang people must remember na ESO is an environmental organization, and being isa kasi akong ESO member na part ng YACAP, and yung ESO namin part siya ng YACAP. We actually had to do a big overhaul para lang makater namin sa climate education yung mga ginagawa namin. Kasi it's important that people know that the fight for climate justice is not actually 100% environmental lang. Na environmental issues are just one part of our fight for climate justice. Kaya ayun, I have to agree with Ms. Mitzi na it must be institutionalized more. And yes, maganda ang initiatives, pero we need more people to actually be engaged with these activities.
Correct. Definitely agree that in order for us to mitigate the effects of climate change, it's not only one organization or two or three organizations who should be involved in this, but the entire humanity as a whole. Sa totoo lang, para of course think about the children and our children's children, di ba? In case of course na dumating tayo sa puntong yun at masira yung buong mundo sa sobrang dami nangyayari. But yeah, I mean, not being pessimistic about it, but yeah. Oh, there you go mga kaiska, and I hope, or we hope here at New Normal, we hope that after this segment you will strongly consider reading more about climate change and of course educating yourselves about climate education. And yeah, don't wait until it gets too late before we start doing something. It's very imperative, as what Chito said, it's very imperative for us to take initiative now rather than later pa. Just like what we have said before, change starts with you.
That's true. And sa pagbabalik ng New Normal 101, tatalakayin naman natin ngayon ang epekto ng climate change dito sa ating bansa. Abangan lahat ito after this break. Dahil dito, modern tayo.
Nakiisa ang PUP Bataan sa pamamahagi ng relief goods sa kanilang lugar. Itong Hunyo 9 sa inisyatibo ni Mayor Jocelyn Castañeda at sa tulong ng mga voluntaryong mag-aaral ng PUP Bataan na ipamahagi ang mga pagkain at bitamina sa mga residente ng Upper at Lower Biyaan sa Maribeles. Pinangunahan ni Education College Council President Ms. Mariel G. Esteron, Pangulo ng College of Management Council na si Ms. Sheila Mariu Hunyo, at mga miyembro nito ang ginanap na relief distribution.
Naniniwala kami na sa panahong ito, bilang isang estudyante at kabataan, ay mayroon kami may aambag na tulong sa aming kapwa mamamayan. At nais naming maging bahagi na mapagaan at malagpasan ang dalahin na ating nararanasan.
Kami ay handang maglingkod hindi lamang sa komunidad ng PUP, bagkus pati na rin sa komunidad ng aming bayan.
Patuloy na bubuhayin ng Politeknikong Universidad ang adhikain nito na maapagbigay pag-asa sa gitna ng pandemya. Ako si Limuel Baruela para sa The Observer Flash Online.
Welcome back mga kaisko at mga kaiska. You're still tuned in to New Normal 101, kung saan dito, modern tayo. Now in the previous segment, we covered what climate change and what climate education is all about. Now for this segment, let's talk more about the severe consequences of climate change here in the Philippines. isang halimbawa nito siguro yung tinatawag na Marikina watershed. So upon checking, the Marikina River Basin actually, the Marikina River Basin is a protected landscape. It's a protected area in the province of Rizal here in the Philippines. As time goes by, yung protected na yun, it loses its meaning, I think. Because as time goes by, it became a tourist attraction for people of they're setting up picnic grounds and other activities there. I know na somehow my batch in college was guilty with this kasi nag-shooting kami doon. So that's also one thing. So the Upper Marikina River Basin Protected Landscape, or the UMRBPL, is a 26,000 hectare protected area in Rizal, which plays an important role in regulating water flow towards the national capital region. But over the course of time, the watershed, how it changes over the years, it went, as years went by, it becomes smaller and fewer due to the human developments involved nga doon sa paligid ng lugar na iyon.
And ayun, according to the Masungiji Reserve, the continued destruction of the forest has affected the watershed's natural ability to hold storm water. So, noong 2009, when Typhoon Andoy unleashed its fury, due in large part to a failing watershed, Ondoy caused massive loss of property and lives. So this is the perfect time to address this issue regarding the Marikina watershed and spread awareness on who is to blame and who should be held accountable regarding its failure in the recent years. So Ms. Mitzi, as a climate justice activist, what is the reason siguro, or what is the context na kailangan nating malaman on why the Marikina watershed is in a way failing?
So we're seeing that the Marikina watershed has actually been protected from settlement, entry, sale, and disposition since 1904, parang ganun, when we were still under the US colonial government. Yet, until today, more than a century later, marami pa ring rampant illegal activities such as land grabbing, illegal logging, and quarrying, all of which we've seen dun sa Masangiji Park reforestation sites during the pandemic. And really, it's this decades of mismanagement, corruption, and neglect that has led us to this. May mga nagsasabi pa nga na nabenta na yung watershed, and I wouldn't be surprised if ganun nga, kasi we're really seeing that the way our government handles our environment is like it's a resource, like it's a natural resource.
That's
and
true.
We forget na humans are part of the ecosystem. We're not separate from the environment, na it's something to use, something to yun nga yung word na resource, para siyang something that we own, but rather something that we're part of and that we have to take care of.
Correct,
Yes.
correct. Actually, not only I think in Marikina, Ms. Mitzi, but there are some reported, again, I share your sentiments. I wouldn't be surprised kung talagang nabenta na yung ibang mga lupain natin dito sa ibang mga lahi. Pero there are some resources, there are some places, I think in Cavite, na they're not treated as something that we should preserve or something that we should put importance to, but they're treated more as resources and mga avenue for capitalists to exploit it as much as they can. So how about you, Chito? What do you think about this unfortunate scenario that we're currently placed in?
Actually, if I may share my personal anecdotes,
Sure.
Miss Mitzi actually knows this, pero watershed conservation is something very close to my heart. Kasi here in Angeles City, that's actually my main advocacy. So, hindi na bago sa akin yung mismanagement of the watershed. And yun nga, some say na yung parts ng watershed nasa sold out pa. Kasi in Angeles City, that's happening. There are parts of the watershed that are actually being sold off to, private investors for whatever reason they use. So, it is really important na kailangan yung mga watersheds natin ma-conserve talaga. And it is also important that people understand how important watersheds are when it comes to combating the effects of climate change. Ayan.
Yeah, it's actually past the point of mildly concerning. It's really, really concerning what yung nangyayari ngayon. Especially dun sa Marikina. No? And now na meron, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, pero I think may bagyo tayong paparating. Or meron tayong bagyo actually na nandito, I can only imagine the struggle ng mga tao sa Marikina, those people who are living in Marikina, with the, kapag kasi bagyo pinag-uusapan, talagang national news is actually focused on Marikina. Kasi alam naman natin lahat na Marikina usually binabaha dahil sobrang taas lagi ng mga, I don't know, again, I'm ignorant of the factors affecting it, pero sobrang bilis tumaas nung tubig sa Marikina River. And
Yes.
To the point na even our rescuers who are acting out, mga first responders natin, they are having a hard time, they're having a very challenging time trying to reach to those who are in need. So nangyari pa is, of course, instead of being deployed immediately, ang dami mga external factors which again I'm not aware of na nagiging involved for them to be less efficient in times of crisis. So with that said, Ms. Michino, could you kindly enlighten us siguro on how the Marikina watershed works and what is its importance sa ating environment, and also kung meron pa tayong oras, baka pwede nyo rin siguro mabigyan ng highlight kung ba't kaya bigla mabilis tumaas yung tubig sa Marikina River as opposed to other rivers out there in the Philippines?
Chito can probably tell you more about the importance of the watershed, pero just to say briefly na yun nga, it absorbs the rainwater and it reduces the risk of floods sa downstream cities like Marikina. So ideally, kung marami pang puno, kung hindi pa siya nauubos ng quarrying, talagang yung rain, bago siya dumating dun sa river, masasala siya ng watershed. Pero as the Marikina community actually said, kasi we did have a bunch of relief operations with them, and we did have mga climate crisis education modules kasi nanghingi sila kasi nakita nila yung importance. Sila na mismo nagsabi na yung pagkalbo nung bundok, since that started happening, lumala yung pagbaha sa Marikina. And the importance of the watershed, really, it's not just something to protect people, but it's also home to a lot of different species of animals and trees. Some of them are even endangered. And also just Marikina, we know it is a basin, so talagang mabahain siya.
Okay.
Like, talagang dun papunta yung tubig kasi ganun yung structure ng location. But since hindi na inalagaan yung watershed, since hindi inalagaan yung plumbing systems natin, irrigation systems natin, I say inalagaan, hindi inalagaan. I really mean like nilet go, literally. Since palala yung climate crisis, since walang, sorry, my mom came into my since walang since walang yung systems natin, pinapabayaan yung mga pinaka-vulnerable, pinaka-economically marginalized in our society. Sila naman talaga yung pinaka-affected by the flooding sa Marikina. Then nagpatong-patong na tuwing may bagyo, especially nung November, nung binanggit mo yung Ulysses, it wasn't just Ulysses it was 4 typhoons in the span of 3 weeks. By the time na nag-Ulysses na, punong-puno na yung hindi na kaya. Dahil nga sa mismanagement, and not just mismanagement, but I would say talagang hindi na siya inalagaan ng maayos. Dahil hindi nakikita yung importance kasi yung mga pinaka-impacted, hindi naman yung mga mayayaman. Kung nakita natin nung, I think, Typhoon Ondoy na binaha yung mga even big villages, medyo mas mabilis yung response dun. Pero yung mga ibang cities, like there are other cities that get flooded as badly, but the rich people aren't impacted, and so it's not as a big talking point. Kasi sino ba yung nababaha? Yung mga mahihirap. So normal lang siya, and it shouldn't be normal.
So in a way, no, sorry Chito, I know you have questions or I know you have remarks as well, pero correct me if I'm wrong, no, Miss Mitzi, pero I think lang from what you said, the Marikina watershed is sort of the last bastion of defense for Marikina in terms of yung to prevent excessive floodings in the area. Tama ko ba ako sa pag sinabi ko yun? I see. Okay. So yeah, Chito, please go ahead.
Ayun, tama yung sinabi ni Miss Mitzi, about the poor being more affected than the rich. Kasi isa rin sa mga main reasons bakit nakukuha ang parts ng watershed is because of golf courses. And we know golf courses are perpetrated by the rich. And to add rin, no, when we say watershed kasi parang based on personal experience din, personal advocacy, people, parang kapag watersheds, iniisip nila may tubig. No.
Yeah.
Watershed is more of the trees, is more of the land area. Yun talaga ang kino-conserve natin when it comes to watershed rehabilitation. And this is in line with climate change because the most important, one of the most important weapons against climate change, is a tree, our trees, because they both mitigate and adapt when it comes to climate change. And of course, kapag nawala ang ating trees na usually nakahouse sa mga watersheds, mas lalala din yung mga effects ng climate change. And especially in the Philippines where typhoons are hitting left and right, no? Yung iba pa balik-balik pa nga like Typhoon Dante. So talagang without these watersheds, talagang mas lalala ang effects ng climate change and mas mapipil natin ito. So, Miss Mitzi, why is it important to preserve the watershed? And how can we preserve and how can we help?
So nasabi mo na yung importance of preserving the watershed because as you said, it not only helps us mitigate, so that's when you reduce the emissions in the air, so for the future problems, and help us adapt so that's when you have climate impacts happening already, so for the present problems, and we have both in the Philippines, we will have both, and because hindi lang siya about humans, but it's so important to remember people and especially the most marginalized people, but it's also about the plants and the animals and the whole ecosystem and biodiversity that's there. And the importance really is also how sorry, wait lang, yung mom ko.
Go ahead, Miss Nikki, take your time.
Okay, sorry, ayan. New normal talaga.
No worries.
No worries.
It fits the name of the program.
Hindi ba, sobrang, ano na yun, pag sa class kayo, tapos biglang papasok. Buti na lang may virtual background. Tapos pasok si mom. So yun, as I was saying, it's really important because the climate crisis is going to get worse. And so we need to start protecting the systems that are already in place naturally, that will protect us and that will keep us from having the climate crisis get worse. And it's so important that we do this because paulit-ulit na ako, it's the most marginalized people who will be affected. It's the most marginalized people who will be impacted. And then you also start to begin to question like Marikina is a basin. In the first place, it's not a strategic place to have communities. Pero since our rural areas aren't developed, people wanted to be near the city center. Because nandun lahat ng job opportunities, nandun lahat ng schools, nandun lahat, right?
So, sobrang centralized, correct.
You'll try to go to the places na may development, quote unquote. So even within the Philippines, may uneven development for sure. And that's why people start, like a lot of the Marikina communities, they said galing sila sa Rizal, galing sila sa rural areas. Pero since walang opportunities dun sa areas nila, lumapit sila sa city center para magkaroon ng opportunities. So if our rural areas were more developed, then we wouldn't have to put people in places of risk. Pero since hindi yun yung point, since hindi yun yung nangyayari, then we have to adjust and we have to adapt kasi alam mo, the answer isn't right now to throw them into the rural areas and relocate them. Mali na yan kasi wala naman silang mapupuntahan at walang ma-develop them. So dapat i-develop yung rural areas habang ina-adapt and in-mitigate yung Marikina area, not just Marikina area, but really the entire Philippines.
Oh, okay. Actually, I learned a lot from that. To the point that it's not actually just by the fact that nature in and of itself dictated that Marikina is not really a suitable place for us to, not really a suitable place to live, but it's a risky place to live to begin with. But not only that, but marami din pala mga socio-economic factors involving this particular scenario as well. So yeah. Last question for Miss Mitzi before we end this segment, no? Miss Mitzi, matanong lang namin, what can we possibly do kaya? Well, actually, I think we've already addressed that question in preserving the Marikina watershed. But as an advocate kaya, what would you advise the Philippine government, to do to preserve the Marikina watershed?
I feel like with all watersheds, not just the
Uh-huh.
Marikina watershed, it's really important na alagaan, stop yung
Hmm.
quarrying.
Yeah.
And more than the watershed, I would also say build evacuation centers that are actually evacuation centers kasi our
Mhm.
evacuation centers are schools and churches and gyms. So
Mhm.
binabaha din sila kasi hindi naman sila built as evacuation centers. Ayusin yung mga flooding systems, ayusin yung mga maraming kailangan ayusin actually. But really, to put it simply, it's to develop with keeping in mind that the climate crisis is going to get worse and that people most marginalized are the ones impacted the most. So sila yung dapat pina-prioritize, sila dapat yung iniisip na kasi if you keep the most marginalized in mind, masasama naman na yung everyone else. So yeah.
That's very true. Naku, Jeremiah, napakarami nating napag-usapan ngayon
Correct.
in this segment. And it's really eye-opening for all of us. No? Lalo na sa mga kaisko and mga kaiska natin. Hopefully you enjoyed this part. And also, we hope na this Mitzi has inspired you to do the necessary actions to combat the effects of climate change. And of course, for our next segment, this is the most awaited, as I'm being told, no? So our next segment is coming right up.
That's right, Chito, no? Because students from PUP have prepared questions for Miss Mitzi about climate change. So, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for that because more of those when we return sa New Normal 101. Dahil dito, modern tayo.
Inihayag ng Politeknikong Universidad ng Pilipinas ang pagbati nito kina Dr. Sanjay P. Claudio ng Quality Assurance Center at Dean Antonius Umali ng College of Political Science and Public Administration. Bilang mga bagong miyembro ng Commission on Higher Education, ginanap ang virtual oath-taking ceremony nitong ika-10 ng Hunyo. Sina Dr. Claudio at Dr. Umali ay mga bagong talagang technical evaluators for Public Administration Management and Governance ng CHED. Ang technical evaluators ng CHED ay binubuo ng mga eksperto na may tungkuling suriin ang pagsunod sa panuntunan ng mga higher education establishments sa itinakdang mga alituntunin at etika ng komisyon. Umani naman ang nasabing pagbati ng universidad ng mensahe at suporta mula sa mga estudyante at katrabaho ng mga ito. Ako si Limuel Baruela para sa The Observer Flash Online.
Hello ulit mga kaisko at mga kaiska and welcome back to the New Normal 101 kung saan dito, modern tayo. Thank you again for staying with us until the very end of our program. Now for our last segment, we are back again with Chito and Miss Mitzi. Para sa aming huling segment, we gathered once again some curious PUPians who have questions regarding climate change.
So this segment is called Call a Friend. Tulad nga ng tagline namin dito sa New Normal 101, Modern Tayo. That is why we wanted this segment to be fun and educational. So if you look here on the screen, we have 3 teams, and each team represents a PUPN, and they will ask you a question regarding each team.
Tamang-tama ka dyan, Chito. So let's keep the ball rolling, everyone. For our first theme, PM is the key. Let's hear the question from our fellow PUPN.
Hi, I am Mia Viriela. My question is, what do you advise business owners to do help prevent climate change?
Kinakabahan ako. Pwede bang ako din mag-call a friend? I guess yung advice ko sa business, it really depends who you're talking to. If you're talking to yung mga small business owners, then definitely kaibiganin sila, kausapin sila. There are a lot of different ways to do this. Like, it would be good if yung mga sa businesses manggaling yung efforts na mag-reduce ng plastic use, sa businesses come yung efforts na segregate ng waste ng mga businesses nila, and especially mga food places, yung mga food waste, i-compost siya. But really, when we're talking to certain business owners, like the multinational companies, like the fossil fuel industries, yung Shell, ExxonMobil, Chevron, ito yung mga top talaga. I don't talk to them to help prevent climate change. They caused the climate crisis. They cannot help change it. They just have to stop. Fossil fuels industries have to stop existing. Wala silang role in fixing the climate crisis aside from paying the debts that they owe to people for ruining people's lives. And aside from that, wala na talaga.
Yun, that's a really good response. And shall we move forward to the next team? So our next team is entitled Triggered Akuti, and we will be calling the next PUPN to ask the question.
Hi, I'm Micah and I have a question. So, anong disiplina ang dapat ipatupad ng gobyerno para masolusyonan ang climate change? At anong disiplina rin ang dapat matutunan i-practice ng mga Pilipino upang ma-prevent ang climate change?
Parang ako nasa thesis defense. may panel, tapos hindi ka prepared sa questions. I think for this, well, really, yung discipline ng government, kailangan nila ayusin yung policies, kailangan nila ayusin yung implementation. Really, the discipline na kailangan isn't from the people, but from the government. We're seeing with how people responded with COVID, a lot of us actually follow rules. Pero at some point, kung may rules ka pero wala kang nakikitang pagbabago, ka-questionin mo kung may use ba yung rules na to, and we're seeing the same thing with how we expect people not to litter in the streets, pero there are no trash cans along the streets. We're seeing how we want people to segregate their trash, pero if you follow the dump trucks, dinadump lang sila sa isang dump site. We want people to act about the climate, but we don't empower them with education and knowledge. And so really, the role here is for the government to make climate action accessible and sustainable. The role here is for the government to call out yung mga global north countries especially, and hindi lang yung paghingi ng aid tuwing may bagyo, hindi lang yung pag-loan for the climate crisis, kasi hindi naman siya dapat ni-loan, dapat dinedemand siya kasi hindi naman tayo yung nag-cause ng climate crisis, kundi itong mga global north countries na bibigay ng loans or nagbibigay ng aid. Tapos pag nagbigay ng aid, may kasamang mga tax subsidies sa other laws, sa other policies, and that's not what we want. What we need is reparations for the historical injustice that these global north countries and multinational companies are causing us.
Correct. I'll not mention yung one of the top contributors na country doon, but wala na. I'm pretty sure we're all aware. But yeah, as for our, again, thank you so much, Mitzi, sa insights, no? Now for our third and last team na pipili natin, ang pangalan nito ay Struggle is Real. So let's hear it from our fellow PUPN.
Hello po, I'm Emma, and this is my question. Is it really possible to prevent climate change in a third world country like the Philippines? Yun lang po. Thank you!
Bongga, pang Miss Universe.
I thank you for that question. I believe, charot. I think tama yung title nito, The Struggle is Real. So, it will be possible if we struggle for it. It will be possible if we act for it. If we as a collective society led by the youth and the most marginalized sectors of society join the struggle for a better future and the better planet, join the fight, the collective fight. And it all depends on really pressuring our national leaders and our world leaders to act and to prioritize people and planet over profit. And one concrete way to do that now is to make sure that with the West Philippine Sea issue,
Yeah.
we talked about it because it is related to climate. Kasi bakit ba gusto ng China yung area na yun? Because
Correct.
of the oil that's there.
Correct.
So again, a lot of the things that we're experiencing is because global north countries want oil. Global north countries want these fossil fuel industries that's causing the climate crisis because it gives them profit. And then you also see how they're destroying mangroves, they're destroying our ocean ecosystems, they're displacing our fishing communities. So really, it is possible to prevent the climate crisis from getting worse, but we have to remember that the experiences that we're already having now, it's gonna stay. Sorry to say, or like maybe years and years and decades from now, baka may chance pa, pero it's not something that we are looking at. What we're looking at is how to adapt to the existing impacts of the climate crisis. So yung mga bagyo ngayon, para ma-make sure, and then making sure that doesn't get worse, because it will. And it is possible because I believe in the revolutionary power of the youth and the marginalized sectors of society. In almost every historical moment in society, the youth have been there leading the way alongside the most marginalized. And this is just our generation's latest wave of revolutions. And it's time for us to pick up the baton in this relay race and keep up the fight and keep up the struggle.
That's a very good commentary, no, Miss Mitzi. Actually, siguro, I'd like to ask, siguro, either one of you, Miss Mitzi or Chito, can answer, pero we know, unfortunately, this phenomenon is here to stay. This setup is here to stay. Pero siguro, siguro a more anxiety-inducing question would be, huli na ba ang lahat sa ganitong bagay? Or are we nearing that scenario kung saan magiging huli na talaga ang lahat?
Chito, gusto mo una?
Siguro, gusto ko lang sabihin na first of all, things won't get better in the near future. Kung iniisip natin ng fight for climate justice is just tapos na in 10 years, it won't be that way. Dahil napaka-long term ng climate change. And with that, napaka-long term din ng effects na ating nilalaban. So, huli na ba ang lahat? I would like to believe na hindi pa. We are very near, very, very near. Pero
oh my gosh.
Hindi pa huli ang lahat. We can still do more to combat the climate crisis and to prevent it from worsening. Ate Mitzi, about you?
Basically, we're getting really, really near the really, really bad times. I mean, ngayon pa lang, it's already really, really bad. You have people dying of thirst on one side of the world and then drowning on the other side. Pero it can and will get worse, but there's still something that we can do about it. And even when we reach yung mga limits na sinet ng scientists, even then, we still have to keep fighting because we have to keep fighting for as minimal suffering to people as possible. And that's what we're fighting for, really. Yung making sure that people are okay, making sure that people, especially the most marginalized, are not left behind when we're developing.
Wow, what a wake-up call. Sana nagising lalo, siyempre yung mga kabataan ngayon sa sitwasyon natin ngayon na yes, it's not too late, but we're getting there at sana hindi na, at let's do all that we can para, mas ma-extend pa yung buhay ng ating planet. Now, unfortunately guys, that's all the time that we have for today's episode. But before we quickly wrap up this segment, tanong ko lang siguro si Chito and saka si Miss Mitzi. The Youth Advocates for Climate Action in the Philippines is a very interesting and it's talagang yung goal-oriented talaga ang organization na ito. I'm pretty sure lahat ng ating lahat, if not most of our kaiska at kaiska ay interested with more about this organization, about YACAP, more about joining this organization. So siguro very quickly, can you expound or enlighten us kung paano ba maaaring sumali sa ganitong organization, sa YACAP?
Ayun, so as an onboarding coordinator, it's actually my job to welcome people to YACAP. Pero ayun guys, all you have to do is go to Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines Facebook page and send us a message. Or you can go to yacap.org/join us. I'm not sure if that's the right link, pero it's YACAP.org and merong button doon that says join us. And for people then na you can actually join as an individual or as an organization. So, kasi YACAP is an alliance of organizations then. And of course, it is open to all Filipino youth. So, ayan, kakasend lang ni Miss Mitzi ng tamang link. It's yakap.org/join-us.
Yun. Maraming salamat, Chito. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Miss Mitzi, and thank you so much, Chito. So guys, inaasahan ko marami kayong natutunan mula sa episode na ito. We can plan again from A to Z, but guys, our planet has no planet B yet. But let's not go that far muna. Let's take care of our planet first. Yes, it's okay to go to other planets, but let's do it while we're conserving the resources that we currently have with Earth, diba?
Ayan, and siguro before we wrap up, kasi there's still a little bit of time, Miss Mitzi, would you like to promote something sa
Yes, please.
mga PUPians?
Sabi na, join YACAP, guys. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YACAP Philippines, YACA Philippines. And really just start to learn. Marami namang resources online. And really, as Chito mentioned earlier, remember and recognize that the climate crisis isn't just an environmental issue, it's a social justice issue, it's a social systems issue. So the new normal that we should be going towards, that we should be fighting for, is a normal of climate justice, is a new normal where we don't have to fight for people having access to water, people having access to food, people having access to shelter. The new normal should be that this is a given, that education is a given, and it all comes together. Literally every single issue on Earth, kahit ano pa yan, pop quiz ganyan. Like any issue on the planet, kaya siya i-connect back to the climate crisis, kasi the climate crisis amplifies and is amplified by other socio-economic issues happening on the Earth. Hindi na sa vacuum yung environmental advocacy natin. So yeah, it could be very, very overwhelming. I understand that. There is also climate anxiety and climate trauma, and I suggest you guys look into that when you're also looking into the science of the climate crisis, because it can get really, really scary, really, really fast. So slow down then and pace yourselves. We have to take care of our mental health, and especially now with the COVID pandemic and the horrible response of our government, it has to be something that we take care of.
Yeah. Correct. And if I may add then, Jeremiah,
sure.
I would just like to say to everyone, in order to help them, we should also look for our localized demands kung taga saan man tayo. Kasi here in Angeles City, we are currently fighting for watershed rehabilitation. And I'm sure sa inyo, Jeremiah, in San Pedro, Laguna, may pinaglalaban din kayo locally when it comes to, climate justice and the climate action. So, ayan, thank you very much to our honored guest, Ms. Jonelle Tan, for sharing with us her knowledge about climate change and for inspiring us to act and change the course of, the climate crisis. Sana po nag-enjoy kayo sa aming show, especially dito sa last segment natin. I know I had fun.
Yeah, actually, not only did I enjoy, pero ang dami kong natutunan, not only from Miss Mitzi, but sa iyo rin, Chito, actually. So thank you so much for being here with us sa New Normal 101. So guys, mga kaiska, see you all next time in New Normal 101. At huwag niyo kakalimutan, dito sa New Normal 101, modern tayo.
Ibinahagi ng PUP College of Arts and Letters sa kanilang Facebook post ang pagbati nito kay College of Arts Coordinator Professor Rowan Jesadino matapos makatanggap ng liham mula sa University of Hawaii at Hilo. Nakapaloob sa nasabing liham ang pagkatanggap upang maitanghal ang research study ni Professor Dino na pinamanggatang Long Distance Transnationalism of Filipino Transmigrants in the Care Economy of Canada sa unang pandaigdigang virtual na komperensiya sa pagtuturo ng Filipino bilang pangalawang wika o IBCT-FSL 2021. Layon ng komperensiya na maitalakay ang mga hamon sa pagtuturo ng Filipino bilang pangalawang wika sa mga estudyante, makapaglatag ng agenda sa pagtuturo at makabuo ng isang network ng mga scholar na magsusulong ng larangan ng pagtuturo ng Filipino bilang pangalawang wika. Ang aktibidad na ito ay inorganisa mismo ng University of Hawaii at Hilo at Universidad ng Santo Tomas na siyang gaganapin sa loob ng 3 araw na sinimulan kahapon, 17 ng Hunyo at magtatapos sa Sabado, 19 ng Hunyo via Zoom. Ako si Limuel Baruela para sa The Observer Flash Online.